First and Cam, we are back live again, recapping week 5 of the college football season. A very interesting week in college football, some upsets. We'll start with the AP poll top 25. We're going to talk about our bets that we won and lost. We're going to get into the last four in and first four out of the college football playoff, and we'll give our 1 through 12 of who we think is going to get in. So let's start with the AP poll. Not much has really changed at the top with Ohio State still at number 1, but Oregon jumps all the way from 6 to number 2, kind of like how I predicted if they were to beat Penn State. Miami sitting at third again. Ole Miss jumps all the way up to fourth. Oklahoma down to 5. Texas A&M to 6. Penn State drops to 7. Indiana barely edging out Iowa. Interesting game, gets to 8. Texas sitting at 9. Alabama rounding out the top 10. And then Texas Tech 11. Georgia drops to 12. LSU 13 deservedly. Iowa State stays in this 14 spot that I've been talking about all season. Tennessee at 15. Vanderbilt jumps to 16. Other notables, Mizzou at 19. Virginia gets in at 24. Notre Dame at 21. Illinois back at 22 again. I think this has probably been the best AP poll that's come out this season. I still really don't agree with Iowa State staying in that 14 spot because I do think it's kind of dangerous as far as what seedings mean for the games. And then Texas Tech, I think they're just going to be a prove it team week by week. If they keep winning, then they may rise upon the ranks because we know that their roster is good, but I don't really know how great that team actually is. And then LSU, an offense that's been struggling, they struggled again against Ole Miss, and we saw Trinidad Chambliss light it up for the third straight week. So give me your thoughts on the AP poll top 25 and maybe some shifts you'd like to make.
Well, I like how responsive the AP was for bumping Ole Miss to 4, Oregon jumping to 2. I think that was really the game where I was looking at Penn State. If they'd won, obviously they'd be number 2, but Oregon getting them. So glad they jumped up. Ole Miss, same thing with them. Texas A&M, I'm glad they're getting some respect. You know, you and I talked about this last week, and just I didn't think they could be as consistent of a football team, and they certainly proved that they are a consistent team this week against Auburn. So that was great. LSU at 13. I'm not sure what they've proven at this point to be in the top 15. For example, Iowa State's undefeated. Georgia took a loss to a really good team that we know of. Texas Tech is undefeated. I don't know why LSU sits kind of in that spot. I would say the same thing about Texas. Neither one of those, LSU and Texas, have proven to me that they are top 15 teams. Not that they can't be, not that their roster doesn't say that they are, but they haven't they haven't done anything impressive that makes me say, yeah, that's a really good team. And if the playoff were to happen today, like one of those, probably both of those teams would get in, honestly, at that 13 spot. So I'm not a huge fan of those two. Everything else I kind of like. I think Mizzou could be a little higher. They'll have a
Yeah.
game in 2 weeks that will certainly prove that. I like Vanderbilt getting some respect. Vanderbilt's probably a better football team than Texas Tech right now, but that's for a later time. And then Virginia, I had Florida State covering and beating them, but I'm glad they're in the top 24. That's actually the old Clemson OC. For wondering why Clemson stinks on offense and why Virginia's so good on offense, it's the OC left and went to Virginia. So glad they're getting some respect too. And then Arizona State climbing back in. I think the AP really likes them. I think the
Yeah.
AP likes, or they do a, what's the word I'm looking for? They are very brand recognition favorable, as in,
Right.
there's no reason to have Arizona State at 25. They haven't done anything to warrant that. However, because we saw them last year, everybody's kind of like, yeah, we'll put them in there and we'll have them there at the same spot. So I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm glad they're there. The Big 12 getting some good shine here.
I'm about to say, I think it is because they need another Big 12 representation. If you look at this list, you've got BYU, who's ranked 23rd. They're going to kind of be in that low 20 spot all season. They're probably not going to make a jump. Arizona State, they won't be able to make a jump anymore, but I think the representation of the conference just has to be in there. I mean, we even have some ACC representation in there. We have 3 teams in the top 25 from the ACC. So I think everybody's going to get their just due. Obviously, the Big Ten looks like they're going to be wearing the crown for the next couple of weeks. But we talk about Texas being at number 9. I just don't think that they've shown us anything or given us a reason why as they should be in that top 10. Hell, I think Bama would beat them right now if they were to play. And so
Hmm.
I agree on the Texas sentiment. Indiana, who I think is a little bit overrated, had a really big scare against Iowa. But if you're going to go undefeated, you're going to have a couple games like that each season. Texas A&M, who is probably the most impressive team to me this year, with their two receivers. Casey Concepcion goes over 100 yards. Marcel Reed has a decent game. I think the penalties for Auburn are what really kind of drove that game into the dirt for them. We'll talk about that game a little bit later, but Miami's keeping on is going to keep on rolling. Ole Miss, I mean, if they're the king of the SEC right now, I guess so. I would like to see them against Alabama. I would like to see them against A&M. So we'll see about that in the future. But I do like this rankings list as far as just 1 through 25. Illinois, I mean, they kicked USC out, pretty much saved their spot in the top 25 for the rest of the season. I go back on my word of what I said last week. And then interesting team right now for me is Michigan because they can make some noise, I think, late in the season. Obviously, they have the game at the end of the season against Ohio State. But that's a team to really watch your eye on because we talk about brand recognition. Michigan has a couple impressive wins in a row. I could see them jump into that 14 spot, see them jump to that 13 spot, especially if these other teams lose. So the AP polls are going to get tricky. And as we go on, we're going to see the importance of these polls. Let's get to our bets on this weekend because I went 3-5. And because it's my show, I'm going to say I went 3-4 because of Tennessee getting up that half point in overtime. I just think it's kind of stupid. But um, just to go off of my losses, I had Georgia -5.5, which obviously was probably the worst pick of the weekend. Georgia just doesn't look very good. DeBoer's got Kirby Smart's number, and I don't know. Gunnar Stockton had a hype for a couple of weeks after the Tennessee game, and now it just looks very regular. And then Ty Simpson, on the other hand, looks like, he looks like the right quarterback for Alabama.
Mm.
Another loss I took this week was Washington +8.5. They played their first half really well, and I thought they might have had a chance, but as I saw their offense get stifled on the goal line a couple times, I just knew that Ohio State was going to pull it out in the second half. Another loss was the worst one of the weekend was Arkansas covering that 4.5 against Notre Dame. Terrible, terrible decision. Just not a team I should have ever put money on. Obviously, they fired their coach as well this weekend. So
Yikes.
just an awful pick. One of those ones where if you counted on me, that was your last leg of your parlay. I'm sorry, but yeah, Arkansas with the worst showing of this weekend. So give me your record this weekend and what bets did you lose? We'll get to the ones that we won.
I was 3-4, and my weekend started horrible as Florida State goes overtime against Virginia, and it's like, well, what's going on here? Now, I put too much faith into Florida State's defense. I knew that Virginia offense was good. They're like top five in scoring in the country. I knew they were good. I just thought Florida State could stop them, and they couldn't. Like it was just back and forth. Now, I will give Tommy Castellanos, a lot of credit. I didn't know that he could be as formidable of a pocket quarterback as he was. I mean, he had that touchdown to, I believe it was Deuce Robinson, who bobbled it at the end in overtime and then ended up going to fourth down. And then the fans rushed the field right after, which I love that, by the way. Shout out to Virginia and just the ball knowing students out there. The moment that ball hit the ground, they were on the field. Like they knew no pass interference, nothing. They didn't wait to see the ball secured, hit the ground. It was fourth down. They're on the field. That was awesome. I love that. So my weekend started horrible with that. -7.5. So that got to halftime at 28-28. And I was like, yeah, I would go ahead and just mark that one as a loss. I had USC covering against Illinois. And again, another team where I thought the
Yeah,
defense would step up and get a couple
same.
stops. That first drive, USC was driving, it was Swiss cheese. Both defenses, Swiss cheese. Both offenses can move the ball, do whatever they wanted to do. USC had the ball, first and 10, fumble. Illinois picks it up, they score, and then now USC's playing catch up for the rest of the game. So no good there. I had Indiana covering 7.5 against Iowa. Blessed that it wasn't 6.5, because I would have been irate. But I thought Iowa would not be able to score with Indiana. It turns out they can stop them, and they got a few points. So that was interesting. And then you and I both were on Georgia. This is one of those games where I wasn't gonna like pick against Kirby Smart again, but it kind of feels like DeBoer has that. He just has whatever it is. He is the Kirby Smart stopper. It kind of reminds me of that like Rex Ryan Jets team against the Patriots. It's like it didn't matter what the Jets record was way back in the day. Rex Ryan always had his number against Bill Belichick and
Yeah.
that Patriot team. It kind of the same thing there. And we both had Ole Miss covering, and then I had Ohio State covering Washington. I thought that was kind of a steal. You and I felt differently about that one. I should have went Mizzou not covering against UMass, but I got scared. So I went 3-4 last week as well.
Yeah. So we can talk about the Oregon cover because they went into overtime against Penn State, which in a game where I thought Penn State, well, they got down 17-3, and I thought it was virtually over after that. Dante Moore looks like
Yeah.
QB1 right now. And Drew Aller looks like, one of the bottom tier quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Just the decisions that he's making, some of those plays on fourth and short for them. I mean, Oregon starts the game off going for it on fourth and short multiple times. And so
Right.
it just kind of sent a signal to me that like Dan Lanning is not scared of this crowd. He's not scared of this environment, and he thinks that they can win this game going for it in fourth and short in their own territory. But Penn State, to me, I mean, they probably have margin for error for one more loss with James Franklin, and they probably kiss their playoff hopes goodbye. I mean, Penn State, they're now 4-21 under James Franklin versus top 10 teams, 1-17 against top 10 Big Ten teams.
Well, to to be fair, the other two teams he's playing against have won national championships. So it's not in Michigan and Ohio State most recently. So I don't know that I would take that top 10 against the Big Ten all that serious. I think that when you start to look at him playing against top 10 teams outside of Ohio State and outside of Michigan, because we would both say that those are probably two at the time, Harbaugh and now Ryan Day, but what was Urban Meyer, were probably better coaches than James Franklin. I think the issue with Penn State is that it's the same thing on offense every year. I mean, you think about it back when they had Saquon Barkley. That offense was like, it was solid, but it was still kind of like, man, there's a lot to be desired here still. And so
Right.
for him not to have figured out that offensive side and to really lean into the identity of the team, which is that defense and really that pass rush, is awesome. But there has to be another way. We don't have Tyler Warren anymore. We can't just put a tight end at running back and at quarterback and getting the ball on a screen. Like it has to be a much more creative way to spread the ball around. I happen to think Drew Aller is a decent quarterback, but when you're in an offense that
I
is
do not.
that's very difficult to operate and you only throw that you don't have any rhythm, like it's gonna be inconsistent. Like any of the Penn State quarterbacks have just looked meh over the past 10 years. I look at Dan Lanning though to flip kind of over to the winning side. He's, I think, had the great fortune of playing now Ohio State and Penn State early in the year, being in the Big Ten. And I think that's been a huge test for him. Now, he beat Ohio State 2 years ago when they had Kyle McCord.
Hmm.
And that was a great game for him just to be like, hey, we're here. We kind of stamped it. And they lost to Washington twice that year as well. But then to go up to Penn State and beat them, it's like, Oregon is the second or third best team in the Big Ten, and there's no other way around that. I love what Dan Lanning is building. I don't know that he's going to leave that school, and so it's going to be a three, four-headed monster. If Bryce Underwood can come to his own, Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon, Penn State's probably fourth in that equation. I think they're going to be the same
Yeah.
way every time until James Franklin can turn it around with his offense.
Well, to go back to stay on the quarterbacks here, I think Drew Aller, to me, has played himself out of the first three rounds of the NFL draft. Just what he's shown, what his makeup was coming into the season, the expectations of him last year, not really living up to that either. So just 2 years of kind of just, like we expect more of this guy, what he's giving us kind of just above average productivity. And then you have Bo Prabula going to Mizzou and kind of setting the team on fire and playing really well. And he goes from a sad transfer portal window story last year to, Penn State fans are booing Drew Aller and tweeting about how Bo Prabula is the one who got away. And it's just an interesting turn of events. But I think Drew Aller has really played himself out of being a high overall draft selection. I don't really know what the quarterbacks shape out to be in the draft this year, but I could tell you right now that he has definitely played himself out of some good money.
Y- Yes, maybe, but he's 6'5", 230. And so that frame you can't coach. That frame works when it's cold outside. That frame works late in the playoffs, like when things are tight. He's got a big arm. I We talked about this before, but NFL coaches think college coaches are stupid. College coaches think high school coaches are stupid. And so I do think that he still has a shot. Now, is he a first round draft pick? If I'm a GM, I'm not going to get fired taking him. But if he's there in the second round and I have a decent O line, some decent receivers, and I have a quarterback who, if I'm like the Raiders, if I'm like the Miami Dolphins, like I've got a starter, but I'm not super comfortable there. Like I could see a team taking him in the
I
second
just think
round.
that there's too much talent in the second round all over the field for guys like him to be taking like a chance being taken on them in the second round. I think that second round spot it's almost too lucrative now where I think GMs are wanting to win that round as well as the first round. Even the
Yeah.
third round is still very
There's a ton of
high
value.
level guys.
Yeah.
And so you're talking about a quarterback who's definitely not going to start year one and probably not even year two. I think a guy like him slides to the fourth round. Maybe, his value ends up being understated in the fourth round and he comes in and is a good prospect. But I don't think guys like that, the days of those guys getting a chance taken on them early in the second round, I think those days are just over, honestly.
So I don't disagree with you on that, but we've seen players have okay and marginal college careers and get drafted early. I look at Anthony Richardson as a prime example of this, where he got drafted way too soon and his college tape was not great, but his physical tools were off the chart. And so I put it like this: if Drew Aller went out and had an incredible pro day, like maybe he's a little faster than we thought, maybe he throws a deep ball way better than we've ever seen him throw it at Penn State, like he's going to make some noise. There's going to be a team out there who's going to take a 6'5", 230-pound quarterback who can throw the ball around the field. Like he's going to get his opportunities. So in my head, for him specifically, I think that he still has a chance. It's just not going to be on the Penn State football team on the field. It'll be on that pro day when they watch him, let it loose.
On3 has put out a Heisman poll up to week 6, and Dante Moore headlines it. John Mateer is still up there. As you talked, he's like pretty much like the face of college football this season. He's hurt, broken throwing hand, so he probably won't be on this list very much longer. Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt, who has a big challenge this week against Alabama, has just kept his team afloat. Came in to this season saying that Vanderbilt is a national title contender, and everybody laughed but him. And now it's looking very serious. Trinidad Chambliss, who was virtually unknown coming into the season, now sits inside the top five. And Ty Simpson, who's played his way into that top five after an embarrassing loss to Florida State. Ahmad Hardy, the first running back on this list, who is well deserved, should be probably higher than Ty Simpson at this point. They have Ruben Bain and Carson Beck tied at 7. Ruben Bain, if you
That's
guys
crazy.
aren't familiar, is an edge rusher. He's probably going to be a top 4 to 5 draft pick coming up here soon. And then Carson Beck, who is having a really good season in Miami, he's going to keep Miami in that top 5. Marcel Reed having a great season, undefeated at Texas A&M. And then Fernando Mendoza, who was actually towards the top of this list last week, has a bad game against Iowa, almost loses, and he's back down to 10. Can you give me your thoughts on this list? And do you think anybody has a chance to kind of take Dante Moore's spot at the top?
I think so. I think Mendoza at Indiana, if I remember correctly, they still have Oregon and Penn State
Hmm.
left. Let
Yeah.
me check. They have Oregon 2 weeks from now, and then Penn State about a month from then. So like if they win both of those games and he plays really well, he's the Heisman's his. Like I don't think anybody can take that away. I think Mateer as well. He's out this week for sure. I think there's a chance he could be back for Texas, maybe not. And so if he was back for Texas and he won, he could jump for sure. I think Trinidad Chambliss with Ole Miss also has a great chance. I think he has the best story in college
Yes.
football, and so we can't forget about how good a story is. So they still have they have Washington State in a couple weeks. They have Georgia. They have Oklahoma. And then they have South Carolina. So he's got a couple chances, especially if he gets on top of Oklahoma and Georgia. I think like he could really run away with it. Ahmad Hardy, same thing. Mizzou still has Alabama, and I think they have Vanderbilt as well.
Hmm.
So and Texas A&M, if I'm not mistaken. Ahmad Hardy, same thing. There are a lot of guys like there's a lot of meaningful football to be played in the next 4 or 5 weeks that could really reshape this list. I think Dante Moore kind of solidified himself as the front runner. But he could definitely lose a spot to just a guy with a better story playing against better competition in big moments.
So last four in, first four out, a segment that we really like to do on this show, debating who are going to be the last four teams in the college football playoff and then the last four teams who will be left out. We're going to start with our first four out. And my first team on that list is Iowa State. And I keep on mentioning how they're ranked in that 14th spot. They're kind of sitting at the spot where they'll get into the Big 12 championship. And then I guess their fate will be solidified there. If they win it, they're going to be in. If they lose, they'll probably drop out of the top 15 or 20 altogether. I like Rocco Becht. I like how Iowa State looks as far as what they've done on the field production wise. But if you look at them versus Tennessee, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Mizzou, Michigan, even Notre Dame, I don't
Hmm.
think that they're better than them. And I think that eventually the wheels are going to fall off for Iowa State. And I do think towards the end of the season, they will start to lose.
That's interesting. I like Iowa State a lot. I think that they could be a team where they go undefeated and then they play, let's call it Texas Tech in the championship, and both teams get in. I don't know that if, let's say they're undefeated, they go to the Big 12 championship, and then like one of those teams who's undefeated loses. Like they should have just skipped the Big 12 championship at that point. Like otherwise, if they get knocked out, so I think the committee has to reward them. So I'm betting Iowa State goes undefeated to the championship. You're saying they're not. That's probably a much wiser bet. So I would agree with that. I just think if they do go undefeated and they get to the Big 12 championship, I kind of think they're going to get in.
They
My,
have
yeah,
BYU
go ahead.
they have BYU the October 25th, Arizona State the week after that. So those are the two games that I'm really
Mm,
looking at, like where they have both of them at home. BYU is good. Obviously, Arizona State's back juiced up. And then after that, it's kind of just So if they get it, they'll get behind Cincinnati. They'll get by Colorado. But after that, I think that they they have two big tests in the middle of their schedule. And after that, if they beat those teams, then yeah, they have a pretty decent shot to go undefeated. And if they do go undefeated, then yeah, they would be a lock. Even losing to Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship by 40, they still be a lock.
okay. I can get behind that. We'll just have to see it. My first team on my first four out is actually Penn State.
Mm,
What they showed, I think, this weekend kind of let me know about the team that they are. But I think what's really important is who they have left still. So this is a one-loss team with a loss in the Big Ten, which is, I think, a conference loss is really important here. They have
mhm.
Ohio State left, they have Indiana left, and they have Nebraska. Now, I'm not saying Nebraska is going to be a quality team that could certainly beat them, but they're a team where, like at any given Saturday, they could sneak up on you. So I look
Right.
at the potential of there being a two-loss Big Ten team not getting in, and heaven forbid if Indiana got them, and it'd be at home for Penn State, but if Indiana put up some points on them, that could be a really difficult game for them. And so I'm looking at that and Nebraska as if Penn State sleeps on any of those games, assuming they lose to Ohio State, they're certainly going to be out. And we'll talk about my last four in later because I have another team in there. I don't think you're going to see it coming.
Okay, so my next team, first four out, and I considered the AP poll rankings for this one, and then who they have coming up is Oklahoma. Like I said, I think John Mateer, one of the best players in college football. Obviously, they have Red River Rivalry coming up on the October 11th. And then after that, they still have Ole Miss, they still have Tennessee, they still have Bama, they still have Mizzou, and they still have LSU. So they do have the hardest schedule in college football. Probably one of the hardest schedules in college football history if we really look at it. I mean, even if they make it undefeated through, let's just say October, and then they play Tennessee, Bama, Mizzou, and LSU, there's still so much room for them to get knocked out. By the time we get to November, they might not even be in the equation, especially if they don't have Mateer. So that's another team that I'm looking at is like, okay, Oklahoma, they're going to be one of those SEC teams that gets left out. Um, I have more SEC teams in my last four in, so that probably helps that judgment right there. But they're definitely one of my teams that I think that has a chance to not only fall but fall off a cliff really, really hard. And towards the end of the season, even if they are right there, they might have three or four losses. They might be competitive. They might be in one score within all these games, but a four-loss team is just not making the playoffs. And no matter what record they're sitting at, I just don't think it's possible with what the slate that they have ahead.
No, I agree with that. I didn't even consider Oklahoma just by Mateer being hurt, broken hand, and having to have surgery on it. I don't know that he can recover fast enough to play the October 11th Texas game, assuming they beat Kent State at home. But then going to Ole Miss and then going, or Ole Miss comes to them, then going to Tennessee, then going to Bama, and then having Mizzou come and then finishing with LSU. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like, I don't even it would be as if the athletic director of Oklahoma like lost a bet and had to take this schedule. Like that's almost what it seems like. So I agree with that. I don't even know if a healthy John Mateer, if they could do it, considering what they've shown so far. So I'm with you there. The second team on my first four out is actually going to be Indiana. I really like Indiana a lot. I think they're a really good football team. I Who they have left on their schedule is Oregon and Penn State. And I don't know now if they beat one of these teams, then they're in. But if they lose it to either one of these teams, they'll be a two-loss team, very similar to last year. And because they beat the brakes off of Illinois, they don't really have a quality win to stand on. Illinois is fine, but they're not going to have a like, hey, we beat X, Y, and Z, and so we belong in. I think a 10-2 SEC team gets in. I think Indiana's going to be one of those 10-2 Big 10 teams that just gets left out on the sidelines. which is unfortunate for them, and it's probably their unfortunately their last year with Kirk Cignetti as well, and so they're going to spend that at home or in some meaningless bowl game that nobody wants to watch. So they are my second team on my first four out.
So that Indiana actually was the next team on my list for first four out. It's a good pick, and for those reasons why I don't think they have a chance against Oregon, and I think Penn State is looking at that game at home as another marquee matchup. Won't be a wideout, but it's definitely going to be a game that Penn State is not going to be looking over. And then I think that there's a chance that Maryland plays a really good game against Indiana on that November 1st date.
Hmm.
UCLA is a wash at this point. They might not win a game all year. And then that last game against Purdue, I'm really looking at that game like, okay, we're talking about college football in the last week of the season, late November. What teams are on that hot seat of upset alert? And Purdue at home, Indiana, it just seems like a mega trap game.
Hmm.
Just one of those games where I don't think Wisconsin has a chance. A couple weeks before that, Maryland, like I said, they definitely have a chance with their QB play and just how they look. You mentioned the fact that Kirk Cignetti could be his last season with the team. Definitely depending on what jobs open up, I think he's as good as gone if the check is large enough. So Indiana is my third team in my first four out.
The third team on my list, I'll say the best one for last, is Florida State.
Mm.
Them losing to Virginia is not only disappointing for this team and Mike Norvell, but also kind of puts into question like what's left on their calendar. So they have Miami this week, which is going to be an awesome game, fantastic game, maybe game of the week. Then they have Pittsburgh, they have Stanford, which is bad. Wake Forest is not a bad football team. Robbie Ashford, that crew, the old Washington State coaches down there, and Wake, was it North Carolina?
Yeah.
They're good, they're pretty good. Virginia Tech is no, but they have Clemson as well. And Clemson's not playing good football right now, but I think a month from now, that Clemson football team could be out for blood, and the season's kind of a wash, if you would. But it feels like at home, it's Clemson, Florida State's visiting. That could be a game where if it's at night, anything could happen, and Dabo
It's a
might
matchup issue for Florida State at that point. Yeah.
it would be one of those games where one team has nothing to lose, the other team's playing for a playoff spot, and it gets to the third quarter, it gets to the fourth quarter, things get weird. So for that, I have Florida State being out. I think that there are a couple teams in the ACC who could end up in that title game with, I think, who's going to be Miami. And so for them, I think they aren't going to make it.
That's an interesting choice. Florida State was one of my first four teams out a couple of weeks ago when we
Mhm.
talked about this last.
Yeah,
And
great call.
for those reasons, for sure. Now, did I see them losing to Virginia? No, I thought that first loss would come against Miami just because Miami looks like just a solid unit. But them dropping to Virginia, I mean, you kind of called it about Virginia's offense being hot and being really good. Now, did I think that Florida State would fold under that? No.
Right.
Um, I mean, Florida State, one of those teams where you're in the ACC, yes. I just don't know how much representation is actually going to be awarded to that conference with a with a Miami up there, and then with a
Right.
Georgia Tech in there as well, who Georgia Tech could very clearly run the table. And we'll talk about them more in the rankings coming up. But Georgia Tech has that schedule, like you said, they'll play Georgia at the end of the year, and if they beat Georgia Tech beats Georgia at the end of the year, talking about the second spot could be locked up by Georgia Tech, and so for that alone, I'd agree with that pick. My last team in my first four out is LSU.
Hmm.
And not only because I didn't like what I saw against Ole Miss, but I'm starting to really, really not believe in this Garrett Nussmeier thing. I'm not going to sit here and call for his job yet because the guy's stats aren't terrible. LSU's offense could just be better. Their offensive line is a little bit worse than I would have thought. Now their defense is spectacular. They
Mhm.
looks like they spent all of that Bryce Underwood money on defense, and it's definitely showing. But if you talk about their schedule, they play South Carolina at home on the 11th of October. They should win that game. That definitely should be a revenge game with the week off. And then they go to Vanderbilt, who, if Vanderbilt looks good against Alabama, they don't even have to beat Alabama. But if they look competitive and they look good, that game is scary. Then they host Texas A&M. Then they go to Bama, and then they end the season at Oklahoma. So there's a lot of chances for LSU to climb back up in the rankings and solidify that spot with only one loss, or completely wash themselves out before November even starts. And I'm not a big believer in Vanderbilt. I'll admit that, but you have to give them respect being ranked 16th and the AP poll kind of having them right there in that tweener spot. And then Texas A&M, they host them. it's a big spot for Marcel Reed on the road. We'll see what those weapons on the outside are looking like. But Garrett Nussmeier is the biggest question to me, kind of in all of college football. Like it was Kate Klubnik at the beginning of the season, like, it doesn't look that great. He's got good defense and decent receivers. The offensive line and run game is not really there. Maybe he could put the team on his back. No. And then you had DJ Lagway. It was like, oh, is he going to have a good sophomore season? We'll see what happens. And then the 5 interceptions against LSU, hardly any points. And it's like, all right, he's hurt, so it's probably a wash. And then now it's really like Lenore Sellers and Garrett Nutzmeyer are kind of in that spot where it's like, okay, Lenore Sellers was probably a lot of people's preseason Heisman favorite. And then Garrett Nutzmeyer right behind him, it's like, okay, this is the most pro-ready NFL quarterback that we have in college. And the decisions he makes with the inability to really be able to move, I just think it hinders LSU so much. And I think that that offense is better suited for a true like dual threat quarterback. And I just think Nussmeier kind of limits them on offense with what they have.
I really like that pick. I wasn't sure you were going to go there with it, but that is an awesome pick. LSU, they're another team that leaves a lot to be desired on the field. I think you look at Bryce Underwood. If Bryce Underwood was on that roster, it would be so unbelievably toxic in Baton Rouge. It wouldn't even be like tolerable. I don't even know what they would do. But I wasn't ever high on Garrett Nussmeier. I know some people were. He was another guy where the hype got in front of the talent we saw on the field. I thought Kate Klubnik was the same way. Never really
Yes.
was a believer in either one of these guys. And so it's not surprising. Now he is hurt, I think, and so that's probably going to be why. But even at that point, it's unfortunate that it's come to this. So hopefully this bye week for him will be good to get healthy and maybe go attack South Carolina. But I actually really like that pick. There's a lot of things, and let me just say this: in a couple, probably in a month, they play Texas A&M at home. That matchup looks very similar to Ole Miss. I don't
Yeah.
think Marcel Reed's as good of a quarterback as Trinidad Chambliss is, certainly, but weapons outside, quarterback that can run, and a defense that can get a couple stops, like that profile looks very, very similar. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they drop that one too. Texas A&M playing some really good football, so I agree with that. My last first four out, I'm smiling even thinking about saying this, but the last team that anybody would expect, but is definitely going to be out, I think this year, is going to be Texas. I
Damn.
I don't see Texas playing high quality football. I've seen Arch and I've seen that offense and that defense is good, but we've seen good defenses eventually just get kind of like a levee breaking up after all that water and that pressure. It's like you can only play good defense for so long. So look at
Yeah.
Texas's schedule. So we have Florida this week, which Florida's not horrible, but like we get it. Then they have Oklahoma in the River shootout. Kentucky's bad. Mississippi State at Mississippi State. They're not terrible. That'd be a
Not
really good
terrible.
game. Then they have Vanderbilt coming to their place. Then they go to Georgia. Then they have Arkansas, and then they have Texas A&M coming to Texas. So I'm looking at Texas A&M. I'm looking at Georgia. I'm looking at the Oklahoma game, and then even that Mississippi State game. There's four games there that are very losable. I guess Vanderbilt. It's five games that are very losable for that team. That the offense hasn't been clicking, and the defense has spent a lot of time on the field. And so for that, I could see them like. Let's just say this. Let's say they lose another game and they lose to, I don't know, Georgia.
Yeah.
They'll have maybe one impressive one against Texas A&M. Oklahoma will probably be without Mateer. And that's a team where it's like they've got two losses. They don't really have an impressive win. I, I don't know if I can see them making it. Now, if they lose two games, they'd be a three-loss team with a loss to Ohio State, which isn't bad. But they could be left out considering who might jump them to get in. So for me, they're the final team in my last or first four out. I don't think they can make it.
Interesting. Well, I think that that's a very good point because it also matters these timely losses when you lose
Yeah.
and like the impact of like if they beat Vanderbilt, but then Vanderbilt had already lost to Alabama, they've already lost to Georgia, like that's not going to mean anything. And then Georgia, I don't expect them to fall anything further than 12, and they go to Georgia, so it's like if they can win that, they'd probably solidify their spot then, but that's asking a lot for Arch Manning to go
They
into
haven't beat
that
Georgia.
environment.
They didn't
Yeah,
beat Georgia last year
right, right.
with a
And
better
it's
quarterback.
yeah, and it for them to go into Georgia and win would be the most impressive thing that Arch has done probably in his whole football career, and that'd be very tough. An interesting note before we get into our last four teams in is that it seems like Jackson Arnold is a good example of this. Garrett Nussmeier, if Underwood was on LSU instead of Michigan, is that I feel like the teams with playoff hopes and their playoff hopes kind of get like either ended or kind of go sidetracked by late September, early October. It's almost as if like these fans want to move on to the next quarterback. If it's like a younger guy or the guy that's getting NIL money, and they kind of just like want him to get reps for the next season. I've been seeing a lot of Jackson Arnold talk. I saw a lot of Garrett Nussmeier talk after the Ole Miss game. Obviously, their season's not over, but Auburn, like if they had a QB who they were giving a lot of NIL money to, that might be a situation where they're like, okay, Jackson Arnold, who hasn't thrown an INT this year, fans and who knows, maybe even the boosters are like, we paid a lot of money for this guy. He's not getting us where we need to go. Do we go with the backup who's definitely going to be here next year and give him reps? Or do we ride this thing out because we're giving this guy so much money? I think that's the bigger question that's going to come into effect as these backups start to be the ones who are earning almost up to $1 million per season, that you could start seeing if the season's starting to go sideways a little bit or playoff hopes are just completely done, you could start seeing these quarterbacks getting benched and could really make for interesting locker room and sideline situations.
We've talked about the power dynamic of the GM, the boosters, and the fans and the coaches, and so there's a lot to be said there. When you spend all offseason saying your team has gotten better, this position group is really good, and then you come out and they're not very good, you look at Dabo and that saying their offense is going to be much better and they're not. You look at LSU like Nuss is going to be even better and they're worse. Like
Right.
it's a very difficult pill to swallow. You're 4 or 5 games into the season and you're like, we're not competitive. We can't beat whoever we need to beat in order to even get in the playoffs. And heaven forbid we get into the playoffs, have a matchup against a team that we're not as good. Let me ask you this: how much money is Austin Simmons getting in NIL money to leave Ole Miss?
Oh man, probably at least two, probably
So
at least 2 million,
I
two and a
think
half,
I think three.
two and a half.
I think Lane's gonna. He's a redshirt freshman right now, which he's an insane talent for a redshirt freshman.
Yeah,
I think Lane's gonna pay him two to stay. I think he gets two to stay. So I think he gets four in the portal. And think about this: the portal opens right as the playoffs kind of wind down, and so this could be a situation where Austin Simmons ends up like in the portal while the team is in the playoff or making a run, just like Bo Pribula was for Penn State last year. So he's one of those guys too, where it's like now that things get interesting, Trinidad Chambliss is probably going to win the Heisman this year. Like if I had to guess and put my chips on a guy, it'd probably be him. Austin Simmons could really command. I mean, he hasn't played what he played 2 games, 3 games. So, and not now he already redshirted, but this could be an opportunity for him to transfer. Like that, just another interesting storyline, little wrinkle there that he could be
that is
out
an
of Ole Miss.
interesting wrinkle because Trinidad Chambliss he doesn't have any eligibility after this season. So I
Nope.
really wonder what they plan on doing if he feels a way that his spot is taken, even when he is maybe fully healthy at this point. That is interesting because you're talking about uh, you're talking about Lane Kiffin having to re-up on two quarterbacks next season. So that definitely throws a weird wrinkle into their and just into the program. But I would say that yeah, Lane's probably gonna have to offer that kid probably $2.5 million for one season alone to stay because the kid's talent is there. Just had an unfortunate injury, and now you're riding with the guy who's hot. But who's to say this kid doesn't have an offer to go to Georgia or to any of these other schools to play at? Like you just never really know.
All right, so let's transition to the last four in. I've got a couple. I'm going to start with probably the most shocking one on my list, which is going to be Michigan.
Mm.
I think Michigan has a real chance to make it. They're playing good football right now. Now, again, they have a freshman quarterback, so literally anything is on the table. But if you look at their schedule, they don't have anything left besides Ohio State. And so you look at a team, and let's just say they lose to Ohio State. You look at a team who will have lost to Oklahoma, which is out of conference, and then they would have one more loss to, I'm assuming, what would be Ohio State, at home. And so they'd have one conference loss. And this is a team where I didn't think this was kind of a regrouping year. They're kind of at the spot where they could sneak in. I think Washington, that's at home, would be a really tough game for them. A very similar style of play there. But like Purdue, they can beat, Maryland, they can beat, Northwestern, they can beat, Michigan State, they're going to beat, and USC can't stop anybody. So heaven forbid that they're actually going to be able to, prevent Bryce Underwood from getting to the end zone. So I look at Michigan as a team that could really sneak in, and I didn't see this coming, but it looks like it's going to be Ohio State, it's going to be Oregon, and then in my head, because I don't think Penn State's going to make it. I think it's going to be Michigan at that third spot.
That's really interesting. A true freshman leading his team to the playoffs in his first year after that, early season dip. That would be super impressive to me because not only does he show on paper and just kind of the eye test, like, hey, this kid is the real deal, but to really make it to the playoff, I think that's just a bigger deal than what people might celebrate because it's Michigan and they're just used to being in that spot. I tell you what, going into that Ohio State game at the end of the year, that's gonna be an incredible matchup because I think that Bryce Underwood is one of those guys who I think he plays up to his competition, and I think with the lights are bright that he really does well. Now, the Oklahoma game was his first road test. He goes 9 for 24, doesn't have a great game at all, but that 9 for 24 was a lot better than. I mean, it's better than what like Garrett Nussmeier has showed me or Kate Klubnik has showed me this year. Like
Right.
you put Bryce Underwood on that LSU team, or you put Bryce Underwood on Clemson. Those
Boy.
are two totally different programs sitting at this point. So I look at the rest of their season like, okay, USC, they really let down Maeva with their defense and just not being able to stop anybody. Like I said, Purdue could pose some problems just depending on where they're at. Northwestern's not any good. Maryland, they got the good quarterback who he will be a hot transfer portal guy
Yeah.
coming into
Yeah.
next season. But Ohio State, I assume they're going to stay at that one spot. If Michigan can climb up to maybe 16 or 15 by the time that game comes around, you really never know what could happen going into that last weekend of
Well,
the season.
that and let's say there's Iowa State takes a loss and they play Texas
Right.
Tech and Texas Tech wins. You probably have Michigan not in the Big Ten championship, so they're kind of sitting like Ohio State, where it's like you're not in the championship game for your conference, but you have a resume to get in, and so they're just going to be in by proxy of it'll probably be Oregon and Ohio State, and then they'll be the next best team in the Big Ten. And how are you going to leave out a two-loss Big Ten team when their two losses are to an SEC school and then the best team in the country? Like they have an incredible resume if it holds, if they can win out. So that I just think they have a really good path if they do what they're supposed to do. They'll be favored in all these games that they have to play, except for Ohio State.
That's fair, and that's a really big surprise right there. I'm gonna go a little more conservative. My first of the four, the last four in, I'm gonna actually go with Alabama.
Hmm.
And I think that DeBoer is not getting enough credit for the turnaround that that team has had. I actually think it's very Nick Saban-esque to drop 0-1 and then to look as dominant as they've looked. If this was Nick Saban doing it, we'd be singing his praises about how he's rallied this team and this team has fought back and they've showed mental toughness and he's got them right back there in the hunt, beating Kirby Smart in Georgia. So I give a lot of credit to DeBoer. Obviously, his name was on the hot seat. You had us even talking about who's going to replace him in Alabama, and I think what's funny is the Ryan Day was getting criticized so much for beating Michigan that people were calling for his job, even though he's winning games. The only team he's losing to is Michigan. I think the opposite could happen for DeBoer. That as long as he's beating Georgia, I think these fans might be happy. And so I give him a lot of credit. I give Ty Simpson a lot of credit because I didn't
Mhm.
see it very often. I didn't see it very often in the beginning of the season. I thought maybe Keelan Russell was going to have to come in and save this team, or just kind of what I talked about. Ty Simpson kind of gets them out of the playoff picture, so we'll just put this young guy in to give him some reps for next year. Well, turns out that Ty Simpson could be one of the best quarterbacks in all of the SEC. So I think that they're going to get in. I think they're going to have more impressive victories as this year goes on. And I wouldn't be surprised if they don't drop another game the rest of the season, honestly.
I agree. And the reason I don't think they're going to drop another game is they've already done it once to a team that I think they could have beaten. They just I don't know what it was, but Vanderbilt's not sneaking up on you because they're ranked 16 now. They're 16 five teams behind you, so they're not sneaking up on you. Mizzou is not sneaking up on you. Tennessee isn't either. South Carolina, that's a game where it's kind of a trap game. It's after Tennessee, it's before LSU. So that could kind of be a game. There's a bye week in between that, I believe. So that shouldn't be a problem. But South Carolina could be an issue. Oklahoma, they have more talent then, and it's at home. And then they have Auburn at Auburn to finish the year off. And so this is like a team where if they're laser focused, which I think they are, I think they have Kalen DeBoer, a huge Kalen DeBoer fan. I think that what he was doing at Washington was unbelievable. He kept beating a Dan Lanning Oregon team that was better rostered, but he's just a better coach. And he might just be the Kirby Smart stopper of this time. And he has a quarterback now. We look at like Jade Maava at USC, where he runs the Lincoln Riley offense really well. Same thing with Ty Simpson and Kalen DeBoer. It's like he has his OC back number one, but he has a guy that can execute the offense. Jam Miller's back. I think Ryan Williams. I think Jeremy Bernard. Like he's probably their best receiver. And so I think they're clicking on the right side of the ball. And if they can just get a few stops, it's like they're throwing the ball to Caden Proctor. Like they're just having fun out
You're
there.
right.
And so I look at Alabama like this is a team where you like blink an eye, and that Nick Saban era of Alabama dominating is right back in the fold. He could be right back there in the national championship this year, like 2 years removed from where they were a couple years back. So I really like that pick. I think they're going to be a force. I didn't even consider them being first four or last four in. I think they're going to be in. So I happen to agree with you on that one. My next team on my last four in is Georgia Tech. The
Mhm.
only team that they have left, and this I hate saying this because they just barely beat Wake Forest by a point, is they only have Georgia left. They don't have any other ranked opponents. Now, Syracuse is dangerous, but they don't have a starting quarterback. Duke obviously is okay. Pittsburgh's okay. So I think this is a team where they could run the table, and at that point they'd be undefeated. And even if they lost to Georgia, they'd be in the ACC championship game. And next thing you know, like this is a team where running quarterback, they love pounding the rock, gets cold outside somewhere. They have to go on the road to play somebody. Like this is a scary team. And so for me, I don't see them dropping a game. If they lost any more games this season, I think that'd be very disappointing. They should be favored in all these games. So for me, they'll lose to Georgia, I assume. They're going to be my next team that gets in, but just barely.
Interesting. Yeah, that'll be a very interesting choice for the playoff committee to consider if the only game that they drop is Georgia, but then Georgia Tech is sitting at, let's say, 11 or 12 or maybe even 13, and they lose to Georgia, who at that point should be in the top five or top seven. I wonder what their movement would be because any other year, any other system, they'd just be out. But considering strength of schedule, which is not that great, but a really quality one at the end of the season that's very timely, could force them in. I really want to, I think injuries will have a lot to say.
Mhm.
If they can stay healthy, I hope so. If Haynes King can stay healthy, then they definitely will get in. But if they beat Georgia, they're an automatic lock, I think, to get in. Even if they were to, they'd have to be undefeated to and beat Georgia to have that lock in the playoff, or like to lose basically. So if they lose any of those other games before Georgia and then they lose to Georgia, I think it's automatically over with for them.
I agree with that. I think that one thing to keep in mind is they will have that one loss probably going to the ACC championship. They won't have an ACC loss. So they'll probably match up with Miami and they'll lose to Miami. So they'll be a 10-2 team, and
Correct.
which is that kind of that SMU. So SMU is 11-1, but kind of that same feel. I don't think you can, if you go undefeated in your conference play, get to the championship game and you lose to the other team that's in. I don't know that you can punish that. I don't know that they can be left out. I think they're going to have the strongest case for, yeah, we didn't have an impressive win. Looking back on it, Clemson's not an impressive win, but we did what we were supposed to do. We lost to probably the top five team in the country. We lost the other top 5 or 7 team in the country. Like, who's not to say we're not 8? Who's not to say that
That's
we can't just go and match up with somebody? So I think that they're going to have the voters will have a hard time placing Georgia Tech, but I think they get in. Like it's going to be tough. I think they get in.
so my next team on my last four in is going to be Texas Tech. Now, it's a
Okay.
team that I have been trying to monitor as the season goes on, and they got a lot of respect coming up this season because of the money that they spent. So now they're sitting at number 11, which to me personally is like the best spot to be in. Maybe not if you're in the Big 12, considering because you'll have to play in that Big 12 championship. But looking at their schedule coming up, they got Houston, who's not good this year. They got KU, who just dropped a game. But then they play Arizona State at Arizona State. And that's really their biggest test the rest of the season. They play BYU on November 8th, but I just think they're a lot better. And go to Kansas State, they play UCF, and then they end the season at West Virginia. Could just be one of those teams by default, just kind of runs the table, gets in. Like you said, they get to the conference championship game and then they lose and they drop one game. I think they're pretty much a lock to be in that 10 or 11 spot for sure. And I think that's just kind of where they'll stay. The real noise will be made in the playoffs. I don't think that anything they do in the regular season will be that impressive, but I mean, they're not just a write them off in the first round of the playoff team. I think that they have a chance to maybe do some damage. It can go in as I wouldn't say like the healthiest team, but they haven't gotten beaten up by anybody all year, and that definitely could help going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I like Tech. I think Texas Tech ends up winning the Big 12 2 weeks ago, and I put up my best bets and had Utah actually beating them. I thought the winner of that game would win the Big 12, and I think they have the kind of roster I think would be second in the ACC behind Miami. They'd be in the top six for the SEC. They'd be right behind Penn State, maybe even Indiana, potentially in the Big Ten. I think Texas Tech has a real roster with real dudes. And so I don't see them losing to any of the teams on their schedule. In my opinion, this is an SEC light type of team playing in the Big 12. And so they have maybe one of the better quarterbacks in the country. And they don't have, in my opinion, any real tough matchups outside of going to Arizona State. Outside of that, UCF will be interesting. Scott Frost down there, they win games. They got blasted this weekend, but this is a team where I think they're going to go undefeated to the Big 12, and it's kind of like they'll end up matching up with an Iowa State, and I think both of those teams probably end up getting into the playoff. But I think Texas Tech goes undefeated. I think they're a really good football team, so I'm not mad about that at all. My third team on my last four in is Notre Dame. I
Mm.
think they will win out. And I think they have to win out and do it with style points. There's a reason Marcus Freeman ran that fake punt up 20 or 30 points against Arkansas. It's like, we're not coming to just beat teams. We're coming to beat the brakes off of them. We're
Yeah.
going to beat down an SEC team so we can have that on our stamp. We're going to go and they're probably going to beat up USC. Like there are going to be games where Notre Dame just goes like to the throat. And I think that they have a chance at with two losses really getting in, and I think they would deserve to be in. I think they're going to find the right combination of Darian Price, Jeremiah Love, CJ Carr, and how they're going to use him. And that defense is going to start clicking a little bit. So, in my opinion, they get in as kind of like de facto. I'm like trying to come up with 12 teams who get in. They kind of just sit there like, yeah, we're going to be right there. And they look at it's very much like Michigan. It's like, I don't know if we beat anybody to deserve to be in, but we didn't lose too many games to be out. So, we're right there.
That's a good choice. I'm staying in Texas. Actually, going to go the opposite of you. I'm going to say that Texas is going to be one of the last four teams in. I think that their defense is just too good. No matter how bad or how average March Manning is playing, I think that Texas brand and just them, the intimidation factor of Texas alone, I think that they're just like they're better than Oklahoma, who's ranked a couple of spots ahead of them. Now, if Oklahoma doesn't have John Mateer, then I think it's over, and you just blitz the crap out of whoever's playing. But then they go to Mississippi State. They have Kentucky, who's Kentucky might be the worst team in the SEC this year. They have Mississippi State. They go there. That'll be a tougher game. But then they host Vanderbilt. They go to Georgia, and then they ended it with Texas A&M, like we talked before. I think it's a really big opportunity for Texas playing against Georgia. I don't know if they'll win that game. I think Georgia obviously will be favored, but I'm looking at that Texas A&M game, their last game of the season, as like kind of like a make or break it game for them. I think Texas A&M by then might be okay to even drop that game, but I think that game for Texas might be win and you're in, out, or you lose and you're out. And for that, playing for that reason alone, I think that Texas could like barely get in at the last week of the season, and then they get in that like nine or 10 spot in the playoffs, as the rankings kind of fluctuate. But I'm hoping Arch Manning can improve. I think it's kind of a wash this season for him to look anything of like a top 6 or 7 SEC quarterback this season, just
Mhm.
based on his numbers and what he's looked like. I just want to see what he looks like against Oklahoma and the Red River. What does he look like against Georgia? And then what does he look like against Texas A&M with all that speed on their defense? I think he has a chance to kind of earn some fans back, earn some trust back with the coach, with the team, and just with the fans, and really just college football fandom around the nation. Everybody is down on him, and the only way for him to go is up at this point. So I just like Texas as a team. I just think they have too much talent around their roster to not be able to just kind of like put the offense on their back and kind of just barely get in. And I mean, when I say barely get in, I mean like 9 or 10, possibly even 11 seed Texas getting into the playoff.
They would be the worst. They'd be the best 11 seed ever in college football
Right.
history if they got in. I would not want to face them. My issue with them and the way it's all been set up is they start out with Ohio State, then they literally go three tune-up games in a row. And so they're going to play Florida at
Hmm.
Florida this weekend. That's a sneaky upset alert game. I don't know if DJ Lagway is going to play or not, but like keep in mind that Arch, it'll be his second test on the road. This will be against the defense that's also really good. Ohio State defense is really good. Florida's defense is really good as well. They don't get any shine because they keep losing to bad teams, but like they're not losing by 20 and 30 points. They're losing by a point or a possession or two. So I look at that game as like if Arch doesn't show what he can do, that Oklahoma game gets really scary. Kentucky stinks, but then like Mississippi State will play against anybody and they will show up.
Mhm.
So I, what you see as optimism, I see as an opportunity for them to lose at least 3 games. I'm not counting Vanderbilt. I'm not counting Mississippi State. I'm not counting Florida. I'm not counting Arkansas. But those are all I just named off really, really good offenses that if they can score 21 points, 24 points, like that's a dogfight. And I don't know that Texas has seen that just yet. I'll give them grace against Ohio State that first game because it was their quarterback's first time playing and they had a new offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. So like I'm not as high on Texas. I'm not as bullish on them. I could see them like put it like this. Let's say Texas loses another game and then let's say they lose to Georgia and they beat Texas A&M and M and they beat Oklahoma. That's not really an impressive resume if we think that Texas A&M might not be as good or Oklahoma might not be as good. Like their resume isn't great. And so and not that I disagree, I think there's way more downside to go on this team than I think people realize, but I want Arch to be good. So I'm rooting for him, but I could see Sark and this team underachieving greatly. And next year it's kind of like, do we even want to have Arch back? I could see things getting really ugly down there in Austin, Texas. So I'm not against you, but I don't know. I hope it works out for him. My last team in will be Texas A&M. So kind of we're staying the same state of Texas. Texas A&M will be the team that I think gets in next and last. I didn't think they could be as consistent. I saw them beat the brakes off of, or try to, or almost did, Notre Dame and just put up a bunch of points on their defense rather. And then I thought, I don't know if they can do it against Auburn. And they come out and they find a way to win. And this was the game where I wasn't really sure. Now they have Mississippi State coming, and then I'm gonna skip past Florida and Arkansas for a second. Then they go to LSU. And I just look at this Texas A&M team and I'm like, they kind of look like Ole Miss, except they might have better receivers and they've got a ton of talent around that roster. I think that Missouri game is going to be fascinating, especially if Texas A&M continues to win, and so does Mizzou. I guess Mizzou would play Alabama, so maybe not, but like they have a real chance and I think they could beat Texas. I think they're the kind of team. And last year that was a good game. So I look at Texas A&M like their schedule at first looked really intimidating, but I look at Nuss not being healthy. I look at Mizzou, who knows? And then at South Carolina, I thought would be really good. They're not. And so it's like it's going to be Mizzou, Texas, and LSU is who they have left. And they haven't lost a game yet. So they could drop one of those and still get in, even without making the SEC championship. So they are
Yeah.
my last 4 in.
That's a good pick. You just mentioned Mizzou. That's going to be my last team and my last four in. They haven't been getting a lot of respect this year.
Mm-mm.
Not that it's making me mad because I understand it with the resume that they have, but I really like what I see on Mizzou's offense. Like I said before, I think this is the first time Mizzou has had like a legit SEC offense that I think that can compete with SEC defenses in the air and on the run. Obviously, we've talked to plenty about Ahmad Hardy, Jamal Roberts, that duo in the backfield, but the receivers and then Bo Prabula, I mean, like I said, Bo Prabula looks like he's better than Drew Aller at this point. And not to say that he'd be on Penn State starting doing anything better, but it's clear that Penn State legit lost something when they lost him as a backup. And if you look at Mizzou, if they can win this Alabama game, which for Mizzou to beat Alabama would be one of the biggest wins in school history, I think they would jump a lot in the rankings. And with that jump comes you have Vanderbilt in a couple weeks after that. Then you have Texas A&M, and then you're looking at Oklahoma November 22nd, which is going to be a tough game. Could not be depending on the health of John Mateer. I think by then he should be fully back, healthy, ready to go. We're
Mhm.
talking about a throwing hand injury, so you just don't know. And then that last game against Arkansas, where Arkansas looks horrible. And if Mizzou needs one more game to climb up the rankings and maybe a couple teams lose, that's going to be a good game for them to put up a lot of points, 50 to 60 points, and kind of just make that kind of just stamp their resume as what it is. Because if they finish this season with a loss to Alabama and let's say a loss to Texas A&M, I don't think that should put Missouri in a spot where they can't get in. Because right now, these AP polls, they can't really get out of that 23 to 18, 19
Right.
range, and the AP poll kind of just wants to keep them there. I don't really know if it's like a slight to Mizzou and Mizzou disrespect, but I think Mizzou is better than Georgia Tech. I think Mizzou is way better than Iowa State, and I think Mizzou could keep up with Tennessee. To be honest, I think Tennessee's offense is a little bit better than Mizzou's defense. But I'm talking about Georgia Tech, Florida State, even Michigan and Notre Dame that are right behind them. Those I think all of those teams deserve to be a little bit higher. But Mizzou being undefeated, going up against Alabama here in a couple of weeks, and then going up against Texas A&M, those are going to be huge statement games. So I think it's just more of a projection going forward that I think Mizzou, not only will they win these games, but I think they'll solidify themselves as one of those last four teams in. And if Mizzou gets to the SEC championship, then you just pencil them in for a
Yeah,
spot automatically for sure at that
for
point.
sure. Big Ten, SEC, both the champion and the runner-up definitely get in.
You have
I
to.
I look at Mizzou and I'm just not sure yet. They haven't really played a team that I felt could hang with them on both sides of the football. I thought South Carolina was kind of a good test, but Lenore Stells in that offense is just overrated. They just weren't going to be as good. And so like Alabama's the test number one, and I'm picking Alabama to win that game. I'll just be honest with you. Auburn is a really good football team who just
Tougher
can't
game
move.
than,
Yeah,
yeah.
it looks way more difficult than it should. Vanderbilt looks way more difficult than it did preseason. Mississippi State looks way more difficult. Texas A&M is probably a better football team. Oklahoma's probably not Oklahoma's not a top five football team. They just have the hype, I think. And then Arkansas is pretty bad too. But I'm looking at legitimately five potential losses for this Mizzou team after a hot start. They don't beat Bama. I'll give them Auburn. I'll give them Vanderbilt. Texas A&M is where I'm like, okay, if a two-loss Mizzou team, if they only beat Auburn, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma, like that, they probably get in. I just don't know if I can. I just don't know if I see them winning all of these games except for two. I think there's a third loss here. And unfortunately, that's where I would say that third loss comes and they're going to be out. Now, we will get an
Definitely.
excellent matchup in 2 weeks from now. But I like Mizzou. I think Eli Drinkowitz and that Bo Prabula, I think that Matt Hardy, they have a great roster. I just, that schedule is shaping out to be one of those that's just a monster at the very end of the year. And they're kind of like Texas, where it's like they had all their cupcakes up front. And now it's like, gauntlet after, and there's no bye weeks in between any of these games. And so luckily they have a bye week before Alabama, so they could really give Bama a shot. But I mean, I don't know. I like Mizzou a lot. I want them to be good for you, but I don't know. That schedule looks really difficult at the end of the year.
I mean, absolutely. Mizzou still has a lot to prove. Defensively, I think the one thing that's always kind of been Mizzou's Achilles heel, and I've said it before, it won't be the last time I say this, is their secondary, and
Yeah.
they have to prove that they can stay in front of these SEC wide receivers because Texas A&M has two of them that could go for 100 yards against them in the same game. Vanderbilt's got Diego Pavia who could run for 100 yards on them. Obviously, Alabama has the weapons that, they have game breakers on their team. And then John Mateer, who's one of the best players in college football, can just make it happen. So they have really good individual talent that they're going to be facing against, like marquee guys that are going to be going high in the draft and real playmakers on the field on both sides of the ball. So there's, like you said, their schedule is tough. They have a lot to prove to get out of this 19 to 20 range, but this is the time to do it. And if Mizzou is going to be for real, then this is what they're going to have to prove. They go to Auburn. Thankfully, they host Bama and they host Texas A&M. They go on the road to Oklahoma, so I think that's definitely going to help. Mizzou doesn't have the craziest home field advantage, but it's better than having to go on the road to these stadiums. So
Mhm.
for that, I definitely give the edge to Mizzou over A&M. Definitely give them the edge over Mississippi State, even though I do believe that we could see Mississippi State even being ranked at some point at the end of this year. So that win could look a lot better on their resume at the end. And then obviously finishing off with Arkansas, it's one of those games where the last week of the college football season, you never know what can happen. Just
Mhm.
make sure you score, 50 to 60 points so that you have that last stamp on your resume.
I agree with that. I think that this is a team that I think a lot of people are going to be pulling for. I think it'd be cool to have some new blood in the SEC that has some shine. And like a Mizzou team in the playoff is a lot of fun. Like they're kind of in a weird spot where it gets cold in Columbia, so they'll be ready for the cold, and they can go down and play in the South too because it's easy to play when it's warm. And so they'd be a nightmare of a matchup for just about anybody. They just have to get out of their own way and make sure that they can beat the teams that I think that they're capable of beating. Bama, they're probably going to lose. A&M potentially, they kind of match up with A&M really well. So yeah, I'd love to see them win out. So let's run through the 12 teams that we both have making it. I'll start. I'll just name them off as I go. I have Ohio State. I have Oregon. I have Alabama. I have Georgia, Ole
Mhm.
Miss, Texas A&M, Texas Tech being winning the Big 12, Miami winning the ACC, Notre Dame with no conference, Michigan, Big 10, and Iowa State as the runner-up. And then for the 12th team, I will have the American Conference winner. So that's going to be Memphis, Navy, North Texas, or South Florida. One of those four teams, I
Or
think,
Tulane.
well, Tulane already has a loss, and so that's why I wouldn't give them the nod. All four of the teams I just named off have wins, are undefeated except for South Florida, who lost to Miami, and so they have the best loss, I think, of all these teams. So Memphis probably leads it for me right now. I think South Florida has a great chance. Navy's just undefeated, probably because the schedule's light. But then North Texas looks pretty decent as well. So probably one of those three of those four makes it in, but I think it's going to be the American Conference that gets their champion is
Yeah.
going to be the one that gets in.
So my top 12 looks pretty similar. My top four, Ohio State, Miami, Oregon, and Ole Miss. Those are the teams I expect to get that first bye.
Mhm.
And then that number five spot is probably going to be Texas Tech if they win the Big 12. Whoever wins the Big 12 probably get that spot. Um, Iowa State, I just don't know. I don't have them in my top 12 right now. 5 through 11 is Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Georgia. I do have Penn State getting in, Mizzou, Texas, and then Alabama. That's pretty much it. And in my 12 spot, I have Memphis.
Mhm.
Memphis, I think, is going to go undefeated, so they're going to get that spot automatically. I don't know what they look like against that fifth seed, and then obviously they would play probably Ohio State in that next round, so that'd be an interesting matchup. But I think the Big 12. I think this is going to be the year where they look back and they're going to be like, all right, we have a lot of catching up to do,
Mhm.
and we only have two premier programs really in our conference in Texas Tech and Iowa State. Everybody else is kind of just, and like we're hoping for Arizona State to be good. The committee would love for BYU to be good every year, but that's just not realistic. And so that's going to be kind of my storyline going into the playoffs is what is the Big 12 going to do to kind of take up some of this space in the playoffs because I mean, you're talking about Texas Tech and maybe Iowa State being the only representation, and we'll see if Iowa State limps to the finish line. We're talking about maybe just Texas Tech even, and talking about another Big Ten or SEC school being able to kind of like swoop in like a Penn State or maybe even the Texas, like you said. And so I think Alabama is going to end the season kind of as a lock to get into the playoff just because of how much they've turned it around. And then Mizzou and I would say Mizzou is probably the biggest question after that to get into that top 12 because it could very much could be Indiana, very much could be LSU if they decide to turn things around. So I'm looking at the Big 12 as like, all right, you guys have some real estate to make up for because it's not looking good right now and
Well,
not looking good for the next
what's
future.
interesting is the ACC I felt like was in the same spot not too long ago, and then all of a sudden Florida State Miami looked really good, and then Georgia Tech's right there, and so I
Right.
think it really is just 1 or 2 years. Texas Tech being right there is solid. Iowa State randomly being good. I don't know how much longer they're going to be good for. Um, Kansas at one point was solid, but I think that they unfortunately suffer. They're one of the Power Four schools that probably gets their roster yanked the most. All their top talent goes to probably the Power Two, if you would. And so I don't know that how much more they can compete. I think that the committee is always going to try and give them two. I just think they're going to keep beating themselves to the point where we can only give them one, and so and I think what will come eventually is going to be 24 teams or however many they need to
I
do.
think 16 has got to be the limit.
16 would be fine. I think even at 16, they would just get two teams and then everybody else would get three or four. And so it's like, all right, well, here we go again. So I don't
Yeah.
know where the Big 12 goes with this, but it really just comes down to like one or two teams dominating. And I think Texas Tech could be that. Like they're good enough to they're good enough to beat Miami. They could square up with them really nicely. They have a really good pass rush, just like Miami does. They could square up with anybody in the SEC. So it's just a matter of fact of have you seen that competition or not? And the answer is always going to be no. It's kind of my concern for Mizzou as well. You haven't seen that yet, a good football team on both sides of the ball. So I don't know, but Big 12 probably gets one, probably gets two teams in, and then it probably just stays there, even if they go to 16 or 24 or whatever the case is.
Yeah, and that's the Big 12 probably ends up being the bigger loser out of the bunch because the
Yeah.
representation from the SEC and Big Ten is just going to be too strong. And those resumes, you're not going to be able to deny them as these teams keep on having these impressive losses, as you may. So that rounds out my 12 team playoff prediction. Like I said, we're only into week 6. The season is almost halfway over,
Mm.
and it's just been a lot that's happened since week 1, and it's shaping up to be a really exciting finish to this football season. I think it's the second year in a row where college football is going to be more excited than the NFL.
Mm.
And I think what college has done a really good job of is take weeks 4 through, let's say, 6 or 7, or 4 through 8, and have turned all of those matchups into like prime time matches where every single weekend there's at least 2 to 3 playoff implication games where these teams, you can't, even if you do slip, you can't slip bad enough. If you win, it's got to be impressive, or if it's an upset, like you don't want to fall too far the next week. And there's just a lot of flip-flopping going on, especially with the Heisman poll. I think that's what's been kind of a surprise to me is that we haven't really had somebody sit at the very, very top consistently throughout this season. I think Dante Moore has a chance to stay at the top. I think Diego Pavia, as long as they keep winning games, he's going to be a good story. Trinidad Chambliss as well. If he gets to the playoff or gets, Ole Miss that top 4 and a bye, I think he's kind of a lock to win a Heisman. So there's been a lot of table turning. Obviously, not any running backs in the Heisman poll yet, but we'll see if Ahmad Hardy starts getting some more love. But this season is shaping out to be very interesting. And like we say with NIL transfer portal boosters and the money, I think that's what's going to make college football even more exciting than NFL because there's going to be so many moving pieces and the parity is only getting tighter, as you see with this college football season.
Not only that, the amount of fan bases that get to be incredibly engaged
Yeah, yeah.
is just awesome. You're a big Mizzou guy, and that's great. And it's like if this was a 4 team playoff, Mizzou is we all agree they're probably not
No
going to make
chance.
it, right? So, but we get to like hype them up and we get to learn about their roster because we might see them play in January, like or late December. We look at a school. I mean, think about like Memphis or South Florida or North Texas, where nobody's talking about them. Michigan, this should have been a year off for them, and so they could be right there. Iowa State. I think the amount of BYU gets talked about a lot. Like they're Notre Dame having 2 losses and they're still incredibly relevant. The playoff has done such, and this is, I always knew this was going to happen. Like the playoff is going to include so many fan bases and make it so that every game that your team has is worth watching and worth enjoying because there are real stakes here every single time. And so I love Georgia Tech as another example. They're not a title contender at all, but they are a playoff contender. And so we have to
Mhm.
watch. I'm watching them play against Wake Forest. Like, what is going on? This is a good football team. So the playoff has done an incredible job with that. I think you're right. 16 is probably the right number of teams. 24 is too many, then nobody really cares. But I've enjoyed getting to know these rosters, these kids, these schools, and their schedules really well because we're doing this, but also because like it's important who's going to be the 12 teams that get in. So I think college football has solved that. Kind of like the NFL does. Like mathematically, teams get eliminated at the end of the year, but technically, every team has a road to the playoffs, and I think that's great.
Another episode of First and Cam. Thanks for tuning in. Another great season of college football. As a recap, make sure you tune in to our betting predictions for week 6 coming up in this week. We will have that out probably either Wednesday or Thursday. So look forward to that. Look forward to locking in with some of the bets with us. We promise we will have a winning record after this weekend. I think we're going to have another good week betting, and we should come out above 500 betting. So thanks for tuning in to First and Cam. Please like and subscribe, and we will be back this week.